we do have some reporting on the spectacular failure that was the United States dropping their bunker busters on the nuclear enrichment facilities in Fordo. This is courtesy of the Cum News Network, CNN. They have they have the reporting, although I do believe that this report comes from the Pentagon, and that obviously ruffled a few feathers within the Trump administration. But let's go ahead. Let's listen to what everyone has to say here.
Tells CNN that according to an early U.S. intelligence assessment, the U.S. military strikes on 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities last weekend did not destroy the core components of the country's nuclear program and likely only set it back a few months.
That's right. So this is an assessment that actually is out from the Defense Intelligence Agency. That is the Pentagon's intelligence arm. And it was based on a battle damage assessment conducted by U.S. CENTCOM after the strikes, according to one of the sources. Let's go to CNN national security correspondent Natasha Bertrand, who has this exclusive new reporting. This is to that question that has been asked about how much damage has been done. This is a real question. It's also a political question that has been...
I'm going to watch this on 1.25 speed because it's a fucking 9-minute long segment.
To something that Donald Trump has been sort of dealing with here recently. What are you learning, Natasha?
Yeah, look, Brianna, this is the first assessment that we are getting that the U.S. intelligence community has found about the battle damage that resulted from those U.S. military strikes on these 3 Iranian nuclear facilities over the weekend. And as you said, it was produced by the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the Pentagon's intelligence arm. And it is worth noting that it is a very early assessment. The strikes were only a matter of days ago, and the intelligence community is still gathering intelligence. They are still working to come up with a full, comprehensive picture of what exactly happened here. But based on a battle damage assessment that was carried out by U.S. Central Command, essentially looking at the images and looking at what was actually damaged, the Defense Intelligence Agency has assessed that the core components of Iran's nuclear program are largely intact, and that Iran's nuclear program has essentially only been set back by months. Now, we presented this information to the White House for comment.
Before, I believe that they talk about this, but why is the Pentagon saying that, oh yeah, well, actually virtually nothing happened? It's very simple. Fordo is it's at the base of a fucking mountain, man. It's estimated to be anywhere from 100 to 300 feet at the bottom of a fucking mountain. The bunker busters that the United States military deployed were never tested. They were never tested to see if they actually had the capabilities to do what they were attempting to do. It is all just a fucking money laundering scheme for the goddamn military industrial complex, because they dropped 14 of these motherfuckers. They dropped 14 30,000-pound bombs, and all they did was break a few fucking rocks. What a spectacular, unmitigated, and objective failure this is. It almost perfectly encapsulates American foreign policy over the last 70 years or so. Just monumental failure after monumental failure.
And White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt, she did acknowledge the existence of this assessment, but she said in a statement that the administration disagrees with it. She said, quote, "This alleged assessment is flat out wrong and was classified."
By the way, I'm glad it's a failure. Okay, I'm putting that out there. I love watching American foreign policy spiral out of control.
As top secret, but was still leaked to CNN by an anonymous low-level loser in the intelligence community. The leaking of this alleged assessment is a clear attempt to demean President Trump and discredit the brave fighter pilots who conducted a perfectly executed mission to obliterate Iran's nuclear program. Everyone knows what happens when you drop 14 30,000-pound bombs perfectly on their targets. Total obliteration. Now,
they're lib posting about not thanking the brave fighter pilots who were so brave that they dropped a bomb from 30,000 feet in the air. They are so brave that they flew. There was no moon. Donald Trump said this. There was no moon. They flew in the dead of night. There was no moon. Some would say that there was a cow who jumped over the moon and he took it with them on his way back down. I don't know where that cow is, but maybe he's in Tehran right now hanging out with the moon as a nightlight. We're like 3 days away from Fox News talking about how there were actually female pilots and that you're anti-woke. It's like, and now you guys are being You guys are being misogynistic for not properly thanking these fighter pilots for failing at their fucking job. Mind you, these war criminals failed to commit a goddamn war crime. And the White House press secretary is like, why aren't you praising them for being losers? Please just pat them on the back. Tell them they did a good job. They flew for so long in that really cramped plane. All for that to be wasted. Guys, we wasted the funds for potential free healthcare to not destroy a nuclear facility. Please tell them they did a good job. They're such fucking losers, dude. Such babies. Everybody's a lib, man. It doesn't matter. Everyone's a fucking lib.
It is worth noting here that there has been dissent, I should say, within the intelligence community, within the defense community, about just how much of an impact these massive bunker buster bombs would actually have on Iran's nuclear facilities. It was far from certain, given that these bombs had never been tested in an actual combat scenario, whether they would actually penetrate those very, very deep underground tunnels that lie underneath these nuclear facilities. And what we are told is that as of now, this Defense Intelligence Agency assessment, it does conclude at this point, again, it is still very early, that those underground facilities, including the centrifuges, including the highly enriched uranium that everyone has been talking so much about, those are largely intact. Now, of course, this does stand at odds with what President Donald Trump and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth have been saying in recent days about the impact of these U.S. military strikes. Of course, President Trump said it was totally obliterated, and Secretary Hegseth did as well. And he actually also provided CNN with a statement. And he said that, quote, based on everything we have seen, and I've seen it all, our bombing campaign obliterated Iran's ability to create nuclear weapons. Our massive bombs hit exactly the right spot at each target and worked perfectly. The impact of those bombs is buried under a mountain of rubble in Iran. So anyone who says the bombs were not devastating is just trying to undermine the president and the successful mission. Now, our sources did emphasize here that there was severe damage that was done largely to the above ground structures at these nuclear sites. And so there was damage done, of course, by these massive bombs. But the core components of the nuclear program, we are told, they are largely intact, and it only set the program back by a matter of months. Boris, Brianna.
They're like, the details are like, yeah, all it did was just break a bunch of rock. There's just like, the facility still exists. There's just some rubble on top of it. So virtually nothing ever happens ever. Nothing ever happens ever. The only good part is that there were no casualties from these strikes because the Iranians evacuated all of the people at these facilities, and I believe they even moved like some of the uranium out of these facilities as well.
Natasha Bertrand, please stand by. Let's go now live to CNN anchor and Chief White House correspondent Caitlin Collins, who's traveling with President Trump as he attends a NATO summit from the Netherlands. Caitlin, you heard the statement there from the White House. They acknowledged the existence of this assessment, but said that they disagreed with it and then attacked the sourcing behind it. What are you hearing?
Yeah, and I think it's notable that when we reached out to the White House for comment on what Natasha and Katie Bowe had been hearing here from these sources about this initial assessment, that they provided statements not only from Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, obviously, who is designed to respond to media reports, but also from the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth himself, given he is on the record talking about what he believes the results of these strikes were here. Now, the issue here at hand is obviously this is an initial assessment. We're still waiting for a comprehensive assessment to be done. And as Natasha mentioned there, certainly more information could come to light. And that is how this works as they are in the early days of assessing this. But if this is the assessment that stands as it is right now and what the DIA found, according to this report, that undermines what President Trump has been saying publicly about the result and the impact of these strikes and what they had on Iran's nuclear program. Just this morning, he has been quite defensive about this, saying it's not enough in his view to just say that they were sufficiently damaged. He is saying they were completely destroyed and obliterated, and he's been defending the B-2 bombers and the pilots flying those B-2s that took these bombs over to Iran on Saturday night and dropped them on top of these nuclear sites at great lengths, as he did as he was leaving the White House today. So certainly it would undermine and undercut what the president himself has been saying. But I do think, as Natasha mentioned there, this is an early and preliminary assessment as they're still waiting to see what the other findings show. But this was the big question going into this. And I had actually asked President Trump this when we were on Air Force One last week coming back from Canada, because the bombs that were used here, Boris and Brianna, had never been used in combat before. Yes, they'd been heavily tested, but they'd never actually been dropped on any site before. And the question I had for the president was, did he have assurances or any guarantees that conducting these U.S. strikes would actually take out Iran's nuclear program? He told me there were no guarantees in life, but obviously that's a key question that we were told he was also asking his officials behind the scenes.
I just know that everyone told him yes, because why would anyone tell him no? He has built his whole, the whole Trump administration is just all of those parasitic fish that leech on to the shark. I don't recall what that. I'm not a marine biologist, so please sound off down below. But it's a seemingly symbiotic relationship that these creatures have with one another. But in this, like, if you're a creature who is subsisting off of the life force of your creator, why would you do anything to jeopardize that? Pete Hegseth is not going to say anything even close that closely resembles the word no to Donald Trump. He could ask Pete Hegseth, like, straight up, like he asked Pete Hegseth straight up. I'm certain of it. Hey, do you think that we will completely obliterate Iran's nuclear facilities with this bomb? And Pete said, sir, we will destroy hell. That is how powerful these bombs are. It will not only penetrate the Iranian nuclear facility, but it will go into the mantle of this earth, and it will break the earth up from within. Within a couple of years, Mr. President, the earth will actually be entirely vaporized because of the prowess of our military and because of the strong sacrifice by those women, the women who flew the plane.
Is how would this play out? What would this look like? Because as we know, the president, even with military action in his first term, does go through these assessments in a pretty thorough manner to want to know what the other end of this is going to look like.
Yeah, and certainly this is something, Caitlin, just put into context, because President Trump is there in the Netherlands, as you are there following this very important NATO summit. And he has been, projecting this great success. He's also there at this summit that is so much tailored to him. He's riding a little bit of a high as he's there. So any sort of perceived slight to what he considers a great success, and so far the holding of this at least brief ceasefire so far, how is he going to perceive that?
Yeah, and the president has been at NATO summits before where things did not go well. I mean, everyone remembers the Brussels summit of his first term, where he walked out of the room at one point. So often when he comes to these, and there is a new NATO Secretary General this time, who was sending the president messages earlier today that Trump was then.
All right, I'm going to be honest. I no longer give a shit. Like, they're talking about NATO. I just cannot fucking bring my... Listen, it is 96 degrees outside right now. I live in New York. The whole Northeast and, the Ohio Valley is experiencing a massive and historic heat wave. The air conditioners are on in my home, but I am still, like, it is still too fucking much for me to give a shit about fucking NATO talk. So we're going to skip the rest of that segment because there's nothing else worth fucking talking about. We're going to close out these segments with just a little bit more polling. And what's interesting about these polls is it went from being virtually 60% of everybody against entering a hot conflict with Iran. This was not only independents, but Republicans and Democrats as well. 60% of polls from a YouGov economist poll, I believe it was, said that the United States should not involve themselves in this. They disapprove of those strikes, whatever. But of course, since then, the entire Republican Party has fallen in line as the warmonger cucks that they are. New polling here shows that like nearly 90% of them agree and approve of what Donald Trump did. These people are not free thinkers. All they care about is what their beloved leader has to say. This courtesy of Politico. A majority of Americans disapprove of President Trump's decision to strike Iran on Saturday, according to new polling from CNN. The survey conducted Sunday and Monday found that 56% of Americans disapprove of the strikes, with 44% expressing approval. While nearly 9 in 10 Democrats disapprove of the decision, 8 in 10 Republicans expressed approval for the airstrikes aimed at Iran's nuclear sites. Again, this is from like 60% less than a week ago. It really is like, it is easy to create a cult. I think I will say that much. Like, I understand how people do it, because the littlest bit of persuasion, you can convince swaths of people with just slightly altering your framing of a question. The GOP has largely fallen in line with the Trump administration's decision, despite objections from Democrats and some Republican lawmakers that the president failed to seek congressional authorization for the use of military force. Unlike some Democrats, my issue isn't that he didn't seek authorization for the force. My issue is that he used force in general. And I'm sure that there is a subsection of Democrats in this poll who are, like centrist Democrats who wish that Donald Trump abided by the separation of powers. That is not me. That is not me. Yeah, I wish that he did that too, but ultimately I wish that he had foregone any illegal and unconstitutional strike against Iran. Nearly all the interviews for the poll were conducted before Iran launched retaliatory strikes against Middle East American military bases in the Middle East on Monday, and all interviews were concluded before Trump's Monday evening announcement of a ceasefire. The strikes, which Iran warned of in advance, appeared to be largely symbolic. Trump announced a ceasefire deal, yada yada. A large majority of Americans expressed opposition to the possibility of sending ground troops to Iran, as 65% said the president should be required to seek congressional action before military approval. The poll polled 1,030 American adults via text message with a margin of error of 3.5 percentage points.